Welcome to the Encore Audio Archives YouTube channel. I'm Taper Dave, and this is my channel. I've uploaded hundreds of talks here that I've recorded at meetings in West LA, and I've also recorded conventions starting in 2013. I've got a bunch of those up. And Walt and Mary Murray, the original owners of Encore Audio Archives, started the company in the 80s, and Walt recorded Joe and Charlie's and a bunch of stuff down in Vista, California. My sobriety date is June 20th of 1994. I hope you find something you like, so please like and subscribe to my channel and comment down below. If you want to hear something that I don't have or that you don't see, I'll see that I get it. Anyways, take care and have a great day if you want to.
I'm Jewel, an alcoholic. We'll close with the Lord's Prayer. Now that she's did that, I don't want to mess that up. Anyway, thank you, Kathy, for you and Brian for inviting me down here. I've been to this convention a couple of times, or 2 or 3 times, and now here I am up here sharing my story. If I can just remember the whole dang thing. And the part I didn't remember, I had people that reminded me. They filled me in. And to have John over here to my right, you know, over 20 years ago, I guess, when I met you over at South Bay Pioneers in Chula Vista out in San Diego. And we were down here in Biloxi. I think we come over to hear Willie Nelson, or came over here and Willie Nelson was here or something. And so we dropped over to the little yellow house man over there. And so we're standing in the kitchen having a cup of coffee. And of course, you know, I've got to be doing a lot of talking. So I'm out there talking, and John come around the corner, and he said, "Jewel, what in the hell are you doing down here? I would have recognized that voice anywhere." And there was John. So, you know, it's a small world. I was telling somebody out here just before the meeting, we were up in Alaska on a cruise, and we found the clubhouse up there. And so they asked for out-of-towners, so we introduced ourselves. And after the meeting, a guy come up and he said, "I think you're my grandpa." And I said, "Whoops." He said, you sponsor my sponsor. And it was a guy that I'd sponsored 20 years before in San Diego. I'd moved to Alaska. And I said, "Oh, where's he at?" And he said, "Oh, he went to Arizona about a year ago." I said, "Oh, that's a shame." And he said, "Oh, no problem." He got on the phone, said, "Guess who's here?" So I got to talk to the guy after all that time. So, you know, Alcoholics Anonymous pulls the world in. It makes a small world for us. And when you're in a place like South Bay Pioneers in Chula Vista, all the Navy and Marines and everything, that when they got the program going out there, they started to send them over to that Pioneer Club. So I got to meet all the guys, and then when they would leave and go back to their hometowns, and then now that I travel, I get to meet people. Now, you know, I never planned on getting this old. I wasn't always this old. I come into Alcoholics Anonymous when I was 30. Alcoholics Anonymous opened its arm to me and helped me get started in the world. And I kept saying, when I retire and get older, I'm going to start traveling. Now, I kept thinking, when I get older, I'm going to get me a motorcycle. I'm going to start traveling. When I hit 70, I thought, hey, I better get moving. And well, I was 69. That's when Cynthia and I met. And we've been everywhere. And, you know, we've had a great time together. So I didn't see the newcomers. How many newcomers was there? Is there any newcomers, new newcomers here? Okay. Are you newcomer or coming back? Coming back. Okay, I can identify with that too. When I get into my story, you'll see that. So the big thing is if you've been here before, you've got a little bit of idea of what it is because you're back. And the thing is, if you stick around, you're going to find out that you hear people talk about spiritual side of the program. This is a spiritual program. There's no spiritual side because it's spiritual just the day you walk through that door. See, and I didn't know that, but everybody else knew it. And then they started sharing some of their experience, and somewhere along the line, if you keep coming in these rooms, that day will come when all at once the feeling comes over you that you know everything's going to be okay. And when that feeling hits you, from then on, everything's okay. That don't mean it's just everything's going to be exactly the way you want it, but it's going to be okay. And I learned through coming to Alcoholics Anonymous that, negative comes easy to a guy like me. I mean, I could sit in a chair and prop up my feet and get negative just as quick as I possibly could with no effort whatsoever. But to learn to be positive was quite a task. And Alcoholics Anonymous has a patient way of teaching you how to see the good side of life. And as you come through the program and start practicing these principles, the next thing you know, you start seeing the positive part of the world. And the big thing is you start feeling it. And when you feel it, good things start happening. And I'm no brains scientist or anything like that, but I'll tell you one thing, when negative makes everything go to heck and positive makes everything good, it doesn't take me long to figure out which way I want to go, right? So to the newcomer here, you're smart enough to pick that out, right? So that's what we're going to teach you how to do. We're going to teach you how to let go of that stuff that don't work and grab a hold of stuff that works. And now I didn't know that. See? The book talks about grave emotional and mental disorder. Now, I didn't even know what that meant, and I didn't know that I fell under that title. But my mind was out to get me. I was always seeing the negative side of everything and wasn't even trying to do it. It just was out to get me. And I had no reason to be that way. And I'm going to get into how I first got started, because James said he wanted to hear a little bit of what I used to be like, and we ain't got time for that. Because I'll guarantee you right now, I came in when I was 30, but I didn't slow down. I mean, I lived fast. That old, forget what his name was, an old gangster said, live fast, die young, and be a good-looking corpse. And I was following his directions because I was living fast. But I was born in Missouri. You can probably tell by that little bit of tone I've got to my voice. And I had great parents. My dad was a farmer, and he loved to be a farmer. He liked being a farmer, but during the Second World War, with the guy that owned the farm, we were sharecroppers, and the farm was sold off and under, so we went to San Diego to go to work, and he went to work in the aircraft. I was 12. My mother was a housewife, and just a nice lady, one of them mothers that enabled the heck out of me. And we got to San Diego when I was 12 years old, and I was wearing bib overalls. In San Diego, it took them years to catch on, but I started bib overalls in 1942. And the thing was, the little school I went to was a place in Old Town, and it was they was ready for the war over there. And they called me hillbilly. And, everybody was shoving me around and pushing me. And there was a little chubby Mexican boy that was born without an ear. And Cynthia's heard this story before, but anyway, and they was always teasing him, so he teamed up with me, and he protected me to keep the guys from beating up on me, because he caught heck too about that. They called him hole in the head because he was born without that ear. So, and by the way, I think about 20 years later, I was sobering up at the county fair up in Del Mar, and I'd seen this chubby Mexican sitting over there with little kids running around him with an ear missing. And I walked up and I said, "Are you Lalo?" He said, "Yeah." I said, "I'm Jewel." He said, "Jewel?" I said, "6th grade." "6th grade?" I said, "Yeah, hillbilly." He said, "Hillbilly, God dang, how the heck are you?" He said, "What a memory." And I wasn't about to tell him it was because of that damn ear. And he probably got up and whipped me right then. But anyway, that's what turned me into the type of person I ended up being, because I got shoved around a lot. And then by the time I was in the 7th grade, I got in a fight, and this guy was beating up on me and scared me, and I come out from under him and I beat up on him. and at my surprise that I whipped him. So for the next week, he couldn't get off school grounds because I'd catch him and whip him every night. And that's how I got started as being a hell raiser. So San Diego was where I had all my troubles, and San Diego is where I sobered up and straightened out. Now, during that time, we'd chip our lunch money together, and we'd buy a half pint, 3 of us, and we'd find a hiding place and drink that half pint together, and all 3 of us get drunk on a half pint. And it wasn't long until, we were doing this pretty regular, and by the time I was 17, I was going with this young lady, or I'd went out with her a few times, and this friend of mine and his girl was going out, so I was going to go over and pick her up, and we was going to go out. And we'd had a few drinks, so when I got up to the door and I knocked on the door, and her stepfather come to the door, and I said, I'm here to pick up Yvonne. He said, not in that condition, she's not going out with you. And he shut the door in my face. So I put my foot through the door. I had a friend watching me. So I just stuck my foot through his screen. And he didn't say nothing, so we left, and then old Bob said, that's the way to show him. So the next morning at 2 o'clock in the morning, the police was at my door. Now, my dad's name's Jewell, too. And when he knocked on the door and asked for Jewell Johnson, they was about ready to take my dad to jail. And he said, I think you got the wrong one. And so then he called me down and they took me to jail. Now, I was 17, went to jail. And I don't know if any of you have ever been to jail or not, but the ones of you that have will know what I'm talking about. Because the bailiff stood up and said, the people of California versus Jewell Johnson. And it was like a light bulb came on. The whole damn state's against me. So here I am, a little hillbilly from Missouri, going to have to take on the whole state of California. Now, what does a smart-ass hillbilly from San Diego or from Missouri think? Line up, I'll take you on one at a time. And that was my attitude from then on about San Diego. And so I got in a lot of trouble and went to jail a lot. That ended up working in the going to work in the shipyards after I got out of school. And by the way, in 3 months I'll be 80. I'm 79. When I turned 70, got a motorcycle. I was on it just a couple of days ago. Everybody calls the old man on the motorcycle. But I had a little 1200 during Katrina, and it got flooded, and so we were cleaning up things after Katrina, and so we were getting the house fixed up, and we was out at Sam's, and there was a toilet here that had a one-piece toilet, and it had an automatic seat that went down slow, and Cynthia's looking at that and says, oh, that would be nice. And I said, and it was right around Christmas. I said, you like it? And she said, yeah. I said, okay, I'll buy it for you for Christmas. So I bought her a toilet for Christmas. So within 2 or 3 days, we're riding along. Here's this nice looking motorcycle. It's an 04, 05, I think, 1200. So we stopped and looked at it, had a good price on it. And so the guy come out and I tried it out a little bit, and she said, you like it? I said, yeah. She said, okay, I'll buy it for you for Christmas. So I tell everybody, I bought her a toilet, and she bought me a Harley. So good things happen when you sober up. And I don't know I'm that damned old. But when I come to a fence about 2 foot high, I do look for the gate. I don't jump it anymore. So, you learn your limits. But anyway, back when I was getting in trouble, going to jail, and my dad used to tell me on Friday night, he'd say, when you call me on Friday night and tell me in jail, he said, I'd roll over and sleep like a baby. I know you're going to be okay for the weekend. But my mother lay there and worry. And like I said, I had no reasons to have the attitude I had, except just the way I put everything together and the way I looked at it. Because I had great parents, My dad was just a regular nice guy. Everybody loved him. He was just one of them kind of people that people just liked. And if he never talked much about God. My mother went to church a lot, but he never talked much about God. If anybody mentioned it, he'd just say, well, he's been pretty good to me and your mommy. And that's about all he would say. Did everybody hear that? I thought there for a minute it was my pacemaker. Well, I still ain't sure when I hear things that everybody else hears it. But anyway, so my dad was always my buddy. He was always there for me. Am I all right now? Is it still working? Yeah. So anyway, and I worked in the shipyards. And now, back in them days, see, when I come to Alcoholics Anonymous in 1960, AA was only 25 years old. And you didn't hear that. I had never heard of Alcoholics Anonymous. I'd heard of alcoholics. And back in them days, you thought the alcoholic was the drunk, the old drunk that on Saturday night that you drive him home from town. And there was an old guy named Virgil Bungie in my little hometown when I was 12. He'd come in all dressed up on Saturday night, a little country town. And by the time everybody's going home, he was all messed up and hanging, and we'd drive him home and let him off. And then everybody called him an alcoholic. So that's what I thought an alcoholic was. And then later on, we met some friends out there in San Diego that always had a bottle with them. They owned a rental place, and they'd rent out equipment. And they went to work every day. They drank every day. And they just was real pleasant guys, two brothers. And now if they'd go to a party or anything, they'd have a fifth with them. Each one of them have their fifth. And they'd set it down next to their table or their chair leg. And every once in a while, just take a little sip, just like you'd light up a cigarette. And different people called them alcoholics. Now, they would tell jokes and laugh and have fun. And, died in their early 50s. One died within, 2 or 3 years. The other one died. So that was the other type of alcoholic. So as I was drinking along and going to jail and getting in trouble, the old boss that I worked for called me in his office one day, and he told me, he said, "Jewel, you're one of the best welders I got. I work in the shipyards." But he said, it used to be, you come in even if you was hungover, but you'd put out good work. And if you decided to leave, you'd come by and tell me you was going to knock off early. But he said, it's getting to where I have to chase your lead down to see if you're on the other end of it. He said, when you get ready to leave, you just get up and walk out. So he said, if you don't change that drinking of yours, one of these days you're going to turn into an alcoholic. And now I thought, boy, that would be pretty nice. Have a bottle to set down by your chair leg and just kind of nip and die in your early 50s. That don't sound bad when you're 25. So that was what I thought an alcoholic was. And later on, as trouble went on, and a guy I worked with named Jim, later on, he would always come in on Tuesday. Actually, he couldn't make it on Mondays. And he'd come in on Tuesdays, and he'd be shaking like this, and a little plum level. I know some of you guys probably know what a plum level is, a little short level. And Jim come in on Tuesday, and somebody would be smart and say, "Here, Jim, hold that on level." And he still can't do it. So one day, Jim come in, and he was whistling on Monday morning and in good spirit. And so I called him aside. I said, "What happened to you?" He said, "Oh, I found a bunch of guys going to meetings. They call it Alcoholics Anonymous." And he said, "It really works." And I said, "Yeah, you look great." Now, he didn't tell me they didn't drink. But he planted a seed that day. See, and I didn't know that. But I knew then that there was something there. So the big thing was after a while after drinking and then going to jail again. Now, I've had 9 DUIs. Nowadays, I would have been put away a long time. But back in them days, it was $250 fine and 6 months without driver's license. So it really wasn't a big deal until MAD come along and really got it going. But in those days, there wasn't that many people on the road, and the bars stayed open till 2. And when you went home at 2 o'clock in the morning, there just wasn't anybody out on the streets. So you didn't run over anybody if you can make it home. But I got a lot of DUIs, and I used to wonder, how in the world do they catch me? And I'd come out of a bar, I'd park my car 2 or 3 blocks away, I'd come out of the bar and look around and go get in it, and they'd always get me about 2 or 3 blocks from my home. And after I sobered up, it dawned on me, hell, they probably say, it's kind of boring tonight, let's go park up with Jewel and see if he comes in drunk tonight. Because they knew where I lived. So, but it took me to come to Alcoholics Anonymous to figure that out, and I'm sure that's what happened. But every time I went to court, there was these two detectives that always worked with me, and it was McGuire and Lutz. McGuire was the bad guy, and Lutz was the good guy. And I'd be in there, and old McGuire, he would be chewing me out good, and he'd tell Lutz, he'd say, no, we're going to put him away this time. We're tired of messing with him. He said, you talk to him. I got to go make some phone calls. So he'd leave, and old Lutz would say, oh, man, he's mad this time. He said, you better get in there. And Judge Brennan was the old judge. On Sunday night, Judge Brennan would get drunk at a brass rail worse than anybody, and then Monday morning he'd send everybody to jail. And so he said, I'll talk to Judge, see if we can get you off. Okay, whatever you say, Lutz. So for 8 times, every time that I'd go to jail, he would go in there and talk, and they'd give me $250 fine and 6 months without driver's license. So I was fortunate of getting off so much. So, but what I'm leading up to was, after being on AA for a while, I'm sitting in a meeting, and who walks into the meeting, I had about 6 years of sobriety, was McGuire. And McGuire, he walked over to me at a closed men's meeting, and he said, Lutz and I heard you'd come to Alcoholics Anonymous and was doing great. And he said, we got to get together and go get Lutz. So within a week, me and McGuire made a call on Lutz, and they were both retired, and old Lutz was drunk, you know, hugging me, you know, we knew you was going to be okay. And me and McGuire drug Lutz out of his house, took him to a meeting, and both of them stayed sober till the day they died. So you talk about miracles and how things can turn around. So, you know, it's blessings that happen from staying sober. Now, backing up to what I was like when I was drinking is, you know, when I went to school, I felt less than. I didn't feel equal. And I told you I had 2 great parents. My mother went to church. My brother would go to church with her. And I'd stay out. My dad drove an old Model A to work all the time. He liked the old cars. And I'd stay there with him, and we'd work on his Model A. And he'd give me a little drink. And the thing was that I had no reason to think that everybody was against me. And I had no reason to have any hard feelings about my parents. But I was ashamed of them, because they were just plain people. They had nothing. And I envied people that already had their car and dressed well. And so I was the person that just was always in envy of other people. I just didn't feel like I lived up to where I should be. And I didn't want my parents even to come to school. I didn't want them to show up there, because my mother was the type that wore the little socks folded down on her ankles, and the other mothers would come in there with fur coats and all, and I just was ashamed of them. And that was me. That was my problem, because they were great parents. So I just didn't live up to anything, to my expectations of the way I should be. And the thing was that, like I said, when I finally found out I could whip that guy, then I turned into being a tough guy. And so that got me in a lot of trouble. So the big thing is when they talk about grave emotional and mental disorder, those was the mental disorders. I just seen things in such a envious, less than type of feeling. I don't know if any of you can identify with that type of thinking, but that was my thinking. But when I drank, I was equal. When I get drunk, I could go sliding across that dance floor and ask that gal to dance and get out there, and I mean, I could tear up that floor. Now, when I finally got to her, my drinking got to me, when I'd go skidding across there to get that gal to dance, she said, "Get away from me, you drunk." And I mean, that is when it really hits you hard. And that's when you know that it was starting to get the best of you. But I kept drinking until that day that the old boss had told me that if I continued drinking, I was going to end up an alcoholic. And when he did that, then shortly after that, I remember Jim. And so one day when I got home, and I was living in a little trailer next to they had a big trailer in a trailer park, and I had a little camp trailer that my wife had thrown me out, my first wife. And that's when my mother had said, "I talked to my doctor about your drinking, and he's got a friend that thinks they might be able to help you." And I'm shaking and hurting and needing a drink. And I said, "Well, I'll go see your doctor if you run and get me a half pint." So my mother didn't even drink, and I mean, she made one of the quickest runs to the liquor store and back you ever saw with a half pint. And the place was, if they called it Vista Hills, and it was a sanitarium that wasn't, 15 blocks from where we lived. So she drove me over to this sanitarium, and by the time I got there, I drank that half pint. So I'm ready for that doctor. And when we went into his office, he told the nurse there, he said, and I'm sure to this day he wasn't on the phone, but he acted like he was. He said, "Take him back to my waiting room and I'll be right in there." And so she marched me down the hallway, and I thought, boy, his waiting room is a long way from his office. And they put me in there, so I sat down there and I was waiting for a while, and it seemed like forever, probably about 10 minutes. So I got up to go see what was happening. And when I got to the door, there was no knobs. And I thought, I wonder what the heck's going on here? And I had a little tiny window up here. And so I hit that door and I bounced back to the center. It was locked. And when I stood on my tiptoes and looked out that little square window, there was some guy looking in at me. And so then I went over and laid down on the bed that was there, because that half pint was starting to work after being drunk the night before. And I woke up, I don't know how much longer later, but I woke up and I couldn't move. I thought I was paralyzed. Then I realized I was strapped down. Somebody snuck in there while I was asleep and strapped me to that damn bed. So some guy, he seen I was awake, so he come in there and he said, "How you doing?" I said, "I'm thirsty. I need something to drink." So he said, "You want a drink of water?" I said, "Anything." So I thought he was going to undo me so I could get up and drink the water. So he come in with a little spout, looked like a little teapot. He said, "Open your mouth." And poured that water in me. And so then of course I passed back out and went back to sleep. But the old doctor come in and told me and said, "I talked to your mother," and he said, "thinks that she signed you in here." And back then they could sign you in for 3 days. So he said, "She signed you in and thinks that might be able to help you some." Said, why don't you, here's a book and here's a pencil. Why don't you write down all the things that you can think of that you resent? And I said, "Well, how do you spell your name?" Because I resented him, and I resented her, and I resented that hospital, because I was locked up again. And the thing is when she come back over to visit the next day, I started telling her stories. I said, I don't know if you ever seen movies about these places, but I said, they let you go out in the yard, and I can go over that hill, and I can run out across the San Diego River there and get out of this place, and you know they chase you down with dogs and guns, and I scared the heck out of my mother, and she talked to the doctor, and so they definitely would let me out after 3 days. But the thing was is that the nurse in there after the 3 days had said, maybe you ought to try Alcoholics Anonymous. And then I remembered Jim. And I thought, well, maybe that'd be a good idea. So she told me where it was, and the Wednesday night, I got out on a Wednesday, and Wednesday night was a big central meeting. The office run the meeting that Wednesday night. No other meetings in town except that central meeting. And there was probably 150, 200 people, a lot of people. And my mother was going to drive me down to that Wednesday night meeting. I'm 30 years old, still a baby. And as we was headed down, I started getting nervous. And we went past one of my local bars, and I said, you know what, you better stop here. I think I left a $5 post-dated check in there. So she stopped, and I run in, and I said, give me a double shot, quick. So he gave me a double shot, and I come out, and I said, caught it just in time, and she gave me that look. So excuse me. Speaking of double shot made me thirsty. So we started on down, and it was, maybe 10 miles away. So got down about in the middle of San Diego, and another bar I knew. I said, stop in here. I think I left a check here too. So she said, yeah, I'm sure you did. So I ran in there and grabbed another double shot. So we got to the meeting, and she said, do you want me to wait for you? And I said, no, I'll find a ride home, or I'll get a ride home. It's all right, go ahead. So I went in, the meeting had started, and I sat down way in the back over in the corner, and I sat next to this guy, and I said, is this AAAA? I couldn't slow down on a maze. And he said, yeah, buddy, you're in the right place. So later I found out he was an Al-Anon. Al-Anons and alcoholics could go to meetings together out there. In fact, they wasn't Al-Anons yet. I think they'd started Al-Anon, but it wasn't there yet. And they called themselves associates. I don't know if you remember the associates, but they were sweet ladies. They treated you so nice. And them old alcoholics treated you terrible. They told you the truth. But, and there was a man and his wife speaking. And they'd already started the meeting, and he started telling his story, or she started her story first, and then he later told his story, and I'm sitting there thinking, how in the world can them people talk about that kind of stuff? I'd done a hell of a lot worse, but I wasn't going to talk about it. And here they're saying things that I'm in denial of. And I'm sitting there embarrassed for them. I don't know how many of you have ever been to a meeting when you was brand new and thinking, how can them people stand up and talk about what they were like? But after the meeting, they had a coffee bar, and so the guy told me, he said, you could probably go back there and have a cup of coffee, maybe run into somebody you know. And I went back there, and who did I first run into but old Jim, the guy that we hit with the level. So Jim grabbed me and got me in his car, and he started taking me to meetings. Now, he took me to a Thursday night meeting, which was in Paradise Hills, and it was down in the basement of a church, and it wasn't very big, and I thought, how are they going to get all them people in this little tiny basement? And it ended up there's only about 12 or 14 people showed up there. And so they asked for newcomers, and Jim hit me in the ribs, said, stand up and say you're Jewel, an alcoholic. And I stood up and said, I'm Jewel, an alcoholic. And then I sat down, and I don't remember anything else that went on because I kept thinking, why did I say that? Now they're going to think I'm one of them. So I didn't hear nothing about the dang meeting. But the one thing I did learn in that meeting is these damn people are sober. Now, it never occurred to me that Alcoholics Anonymous meant you don't drink, because somehow he'd told me about AA, that it was a bunch of people that keep each other out of trouble, but I didn't hear him say they didn't drink. And I definitely needed some of that stay out of trouble stuff. So that night he let me off, and I sneaked out the back door and went and got me a few drinks. And the next day I spent the whole day drinking and plotting, because Jim was going to pick me up on Friday night and take me to a meeting. And so I kept plotting, I'm going to tell old Jim it's good for you, but I don't need it. And so I'm drinking and plotting. And so he come by to pick me up, and he come in, he said, "You been drinking?" And I said, "I've had a few," as I fell over on the couch. He said, "You're pretty drunk. Maybe you better not go." Now, I'd spent the whole day going to tell him I wasn't going. But when he rejected me, ain't no way I was going to take that. When he told me I couldn't go, I said, "Who the hell do you think you are to tell me I can't go?" So he got me in the car and took me down to a little restaurant, and they poured coffee in me for about an hour. And we went to the Friday night meeting, and I sloshed into that meeting. You remember when you'd be completely empty, and then that coffee, they poured about 3 or 4 cups of coffee down me, and I could feel it sloshing inside of me. And they were talking there, but there was an old guy named Birch, and he said, "You newcomers, I want you to know you're dealing with the king, King Alcohol, and he knows you better than you know yourself. And just when you think you're okay, his ears perk up, and he starts beckoning you, 'Come to me, I want you.'" And he just scared the hell out of me. And they said I lit up a cigarette and ash fell off the end of it. And so at the end of the meeting, I decided, I think I'll sign up for this outfit. So I went up to the leader after the meeting. They said, after the meeting, if you want to sign. And back in them days, they signed you up, they signed your sobriety date, they sent it to the central office. And if you got a year, then they sent it to New York. And you'd actually get a birthday card from New York after being sober for a year. So I went up to sign up after the meeting, and I said, "Sign me up." And they had a secretary there, and she looked at the leader and said, "Aren't they supposed to have 24 hours sobriety?" She could smell me. And he said, "I don't know, I'm new at this." And I said, "Well, put me down for tomorrow. I'm not in that damn big hurry." So I started with tomorrow's date. But the thing was, is I saw something there that I wanted. And then as I went to meetings, I seen in the eyes of the people that they had something. And like I told the newcomer back here in the beginning, this is a spiritual program. It's not religious, it's spiritual. And spiritual is one drunk talking to another, that's spiritual. When we can help each other, that's pretty spiritual. Spiritual doesn't have to be a great big flash in anything. It has to do with people caring about people. And that's what we do here. And the thing is that that's what they did to me. I was sitting at the Jim come and picked me up, and we went to this Alano Club in San Diego, and I sat down out on the porch because I had, a day or two. And so I'm sitting on the porch, and a guy come walking up. He said, "How you doing?" I said, "Oh, great." He said, "You new?" And I said, "No, I've been here a couple of days." I said, "How about you?" He said, "Yeah, I've been here a couple of days." I thought, oh, maybe I got him. I said, "How many?" He said, "It's a little over 9 years." I thought, holy Christ, what do you keep coming to these damn places 9 years for? His name was Irv. Now, Irv was a great guy. He was a guy that had his teeth fixed with the gold rings, around the edge of it, and he had a cigarette holder that he held around teeth, and he had that damn grin. And when he'd get through with a cigarette, he'd light up another one, he'd flick that one out, and he'd stick it in, and he'd just keep smoking. He was a chain smoker. And after I'd been around for, maybe 6 weeks, I went back out again, and who but Irv caught me and with that cigarette holder and that big smile. And he said, well, how was hell this trip? And I wanted to ram that thing right through the back of his neck. Well, on my 25th, I think it was my 25th AA birthday, Irv had moved to Texas. And I got a box through mail and said, it's around 25 years, I think. And he said, I was digging in my garage the other day, because I'd told him I wanted to ram that thing through the back of his neck when he'd tell me that. And he said, I found this old cigarette holder. Said I couldn't think of anybody I wanted to send it to but you. And I still got that cigarette holder with that note. So, you know, you make real tight friends on Alcoholics Anonymous. And I got ahead of myself on that anyway. But the big thing is when I got here, and once I got the idea that I wanted to stick around a little bit, and I had no idea what they was talking about. I had no idea what it was. Serenity prayer didn't even make sense to me. And an old timer named Ben Edgerton patted me on the shoulder one day and he said, stick around, kid, it'll get spooky. And I thought, just what I need, some spooky stuff. But stick around, it gets spooky. And it was, I think I had about a couple of weeks sobriety, and Chuck Chamberlain, the guy that wrote the book New Pair of Glasses, he was a speaker at the San Diego, it was the anniversary. They didn't have a convention there yet, but it was a San Diego anniversary, on the anniversary of when it started in San Diego. And he was a speaker, and it was a big room like this, and all white tablecloths, and all of the plates and forks and everything matched, and it was really fancy. And it was, I think it was $3.50, and somebody bought me a ticket, and I heard one of the old timers say, they're going to price us right out of these places. $3.50 back in 1960. So when I'm sitting there and the meeting started, I don't know how many of you heard Chuck Chamberlain or heard his tapes, but he always started out, I'm Chuck, an alcoholic, and then he'd give a little chuckle and everybody say, hi, Chuck, and he'd say, hi. And then he'd chuckle. And within 2 minutes, he'd capture that crowd. I mean, he just had complete control of laying it out there and capturing that crowd. And when he'd capture the crowd, you could feel the feeling. And I'm sitting there with that whole room of people feeling that same feeling that they were feeling, and it got spooky. And I thought, that's what Ben means. Because I felt like I was going to lift out of that seat with that feeling that was there. So Chuck Chamberlain was a great speaker. He knew how to get with two people and make them feel at home, feel comfortable. And that night, I knew I wanted what they had. Now, I didn't stay sober, because later on, like I said, I went back out. And now I come in 1960. My sobriety date is 1962, November 27th, 1962. And in November in 62, I'm not sure what day Thanksgiving was, but I had started a romance, and me and this girl and her 17-year-old son had got an apartment together, and I'd bought an old Ford for the kid for $50. I was working, doing pretty good then. And I'd bought him this old car to drive to work for $50. Nice old car. Back then, you could get a nice car for $50. And I didn't have a driver's license. And Thanksgiving, I wanted her to cook a chicken. She worked, I worked. She says, I work all day, I'm not coming home, I do not feel like cooking a chicken. Let's go out to Thanksgiving dinner somewhere. I said, no, I want this old hen cooked. She said, I'm not cooking it. And I said, well, either you do or I'll get drunk. She said, well, go ahead and get drunk. Who the hell you put, so I got drunk at her. So I walked out the door and went, about a block away and got me a half pint, and I come back and I said, I got it. You don't cook that chicken, I'm going to take a drink out of this. She said, go ahead and drink it. And her son got in her car and they took off. And as they drove out the driveway, I turned it up as they were driving out. And she drove out, and I set the thing on the counter, and I thought that was dumb. So I put that chicken in the oven, thought I'll cook my own damn chicken. And sat there, and I waited on that chicken. I looked at the rest of that half a pint, and I watched that chicken, and I waited. And finally the oven dinged, and I pulled out the chicken, set it on the counter, got the half a pint and took a drink and never took a bite of that damn chicken. I always tell people me and the chicken got done about the same time. But the thing is his car was there and I had a set of keys. Now I'd put it in her name, and so I went out and took that car. And I don't know, a day or two, she'd turned it in for stolen because she didn't, in case I'd wrecked it or something, she didn't want to be responsible. So I'm sitting in a bar with parking the car in the parking lot, and the police come in the bar and asked who was driving that car. And somebody pointed me out, so they come and arrested me. And of course, you know, type of person I was, I fought them all the way out to the car. I never did win. Every time I fought with them cops, I never won. And they threw me in the back seat of that squad car. I always told people that somehow every time after AA, every time I got drunk, I seemed to get drunk, run out, jump in the back of a squad car and go to jail. There wasn't no in between. But that time, they threw me in jail, and there were some heavy charges. There was stolen car, resisting arrest, and it was pretty heavy to me because usually just drunker, and then there was DUIs. But I'm laying in that jail, and I'm thinking what I'd done. And so I got off the old iron bunk, got down on my knees, and I said, okay, God, I give up. I'm done. If going to jail will sober me up and straighten me up, then it's in your hands. I'm done. So I got back on the bunk, and I felt pretty relieved. And pretty soon the bailiff come in and said, the detectives want to talk to you. So they drugged me out and took me in the detective's office. And the one detective said, well, there's only one thing we can say to you, is last night, half of Chula Vista was PO'd at you. But today we can't find anybody mad enough to sign a complaint. So if you got anybody who can bail you out, bail for drunk is $15. He said, you got one phone call. So I called my dad, and he said, yeah, okay, we'll come get you. So he come and bailed me out. But first they put me back in that cell, waiting, and I was waiting on him, and I'm laying there on that bunk, and I'm thinking, wow, this third step works fast. And you know what? To this day, I believe that was the day that I worked the third step. You know, I come to Alcoholics Anonymous, I listened, I saw you had something I wanted, I knew there was power here, and I came to believe that if it could help you, it could probably help me. So I knew I'd worked the second step when I felt that feeling that this third step works fast. And to this day, I believe that was the day that I turned my life over to the care of God as I understood Him. And then I didn't have a very good understanding, but I turned it over. And I got out and bailed me out. So I come out of that jail of writing. I mean, just as soon as I got out of jail, I started on my fourth step. Now I had, I think, 48 pages of fourth step. Because I put everything, they told me, put everything down. If you put something in there that shouldn't have been, it ain't gonna hurt nothing. But if you leave something out that should have been, it can hurt you pretty bad. So if you think it ought to be in there, put it in there. And I mean, if you looked at me wrong, you went in my fourth step. I got everything. But it was mostly fears and guilt and resentment and blame. I always was a victim. I always felt the world was against me. And my attitude towards people was they were against me, that people didn't like me. And then, after writing the fourth step, I was at a Sunday night meeting, and a guy was up there speaking and talking about he had worked his steps, And that, you know, if there's anybody in here that's done a 4th step and are ready to take a 5th step, I want you to know that I've listened to several, and we're all alike. That if you take all the 5th steps in this room and take names and places out of them, you couldn't find your own. They're that similar. And I thought I was unique. And he said, if there's anybody here that's ready for a 5th step and want to step out in the yard with me after the meeting, I'll share a couple of things about myself to ease your mind. And after the meeting, I went up and I said, you want to step outside? Want to share something? He said, I'd be glad to. So I went out and he shared a few things with me. And he said, I said, how would you like to listen to my 5th step? Now, here's what he said. He said, it'd be an honor. He said, of all the people in the world, priests, lawyers, psychiatrists, you picked me, just another drunk, to tell your life story. He said, that's quite an honor. He said, I'd be glad to. And I said, you know, when you was talking, you kept staring at me. Did you know that I was ready for a 5th step? Why were you staring at me? He said, because you were staring at me. So he said, when would you like to take it? And I said, I don't know, a week or so. He said, what are you doing tomorrow? So the next day, I met him at his house. He had a little office in his garage, and we went out in that office, and he shared a little more about himself. Now, I had the things that I swore I was going to take to the grave with me, wrote in the middle of the book. And after he shared a few things, I took that page out first and dumped it on him, and he didn't even blink an eye. And then I started in on the resentments and the stuff and the feelings and what had drove me crazy. And after about an hour, he said, let's go in and have a cup of coffee. Go to the bathroom. Okay. So we went in, had a cup of coffee, and who do you think was the first one right back out in that? I beat him back out there every time I was ready to get rid of that stuff. And I was right back out in his office ready to dump it again. And I think we spent the whole day dumping that 4th step. And when it was done, he shook my hand and said, welcome to the real world. He said, now we're going to get rid of it. We're going to get rid of that guy. So he had an old bucket there, and we burnt the paper. He handed me a water hose, and he said, now, fill it, put water in that bucket, fill the bucket up. Handed me an old burnt stick that he had there, an old broom handle. He said, now stir that SOB up. You never have to be that person again if you don't want to. And so I stirred it, and it was just a bunch of mud. And he said, now throw it down my driveway. And I threw it down that driveway, and he handed me the hose, and he said, now wash him away. He said, there's a bunch piled up down there. And I want you to know that I felt the world lift off of my back. That day, I felt that world just lift off. And he congratulated me and shook my hand. And he said, now go somewhere where you can feel comfortable and thank your Creator for what you've gone through. And so I found a place and thanked him. And then the next day, I could think of other stuff that needed to be in there. And within a week, I'm still the same angry person about things. And so that next day, when I thought of stuff that day and started writing it in there of resentments, I wrote a daily inventory for the next 3.5 years. Every day I would write an inventory. And that inventory is what uncovered me from who I was. Because after I'd worked that 5th step, when I come out of it, I was still me. I still had the same defense against people. And so I had to work against being the person I was. And that 3.5 years of writing inventory uncovered me. And, you know, nothing special, but sure as hell ain't what I was. And if you see who I am now, you still don't have the picture I got of what I used to be. So anything at all is better than what I was. So as I'd write these 10 steps, this bookkeeper, I ended up starting a business, and this bookkeeper, I'd ask him to listen to my inventory, my 10th step. And after about every month, I'd ask him to listen to the 30 days of inventory. And after about the third month, I said, Barney, you want to hear my 10th step again tonight? He said, you mean that little diary you keep? And I said, if you don't want to listen to it, I'm sure there's somebody here that will. He said, no, I was just kidding. I said, too late, you're going in it. And when he listened to my inventory, Dad resented Barney for making fun of my inventory. So, I mean, you didn't look at me wrong, or you went in my inventory. So, if somebody looked at me wrong and from the car I parked next to, they went in my inventory. I wanted to get rid of all of it. And the big thing is when you come out of that, and when you start practicing the principles that you come out, then you find out, you realize what all of the defects of character that whipped you down was that guilt, shame, fear, blame, regret, envy, all that stuff that just whipped me right down to who I become. And then the shortcomings was the fact that all at once of seeing where I'm still at, to where I wanted to get farther. So, and then as I went along, I learned to count blessings, be grateful, and put them on paper. And like I said in the beginning, it feels much better to look at the good side instead of the negative side. Now, I remarried after I'd sobered up. I was sober 2 or 3 years, I guess, and remarried, and I'd never had children. And within a year, we had a little girl. And within 18 months, I had a boy. They're now 40, 44 and 42, I think. And these kids, when they were just young kids, like 4 or 5 years old, and I'd come home from work, and they'd jump in the back of my pickup, and I'd turn around in the back lot as they'd ride in the back of the pickup, and we'd go inside, and they'd want me to set them on this little refrigerator, and they'd jump off to me. And they'd just wear me out. One would jump off and then the other one. I'd catch one and then the other one. And they just complete trust, big smiles. They just knew I was going to catch them. Had no lack of faith whatsoever in me. And I would catch them every time until they wore me out. And after I told that story, if I could just have the same amount of faith in God, in my higher power, that those kids have in me, I would be fine. But every once in a while, I hang on to the edge of that refrigerator and think, God, are you going to catch me today? Because I just ain't going to let go. But they never had them feelings. And then it dawned on me one day. It never once entered my mind. I think I'll step back and let this one hit the floor. It just never entered my mind. So when you're thinking about the higher power we find here, he's always within reach. He's always there to catch us. And I have to know that. I have to trust that. I want to slide off that refrigerator knowing that he's going to be there. And he's never failed me yet. I've seen things that seem, I tell people that faith is the easiest thing in the world when you don't need it. But when you need faith, it's hard to practice. But if you practice it, it always works. And when you get on the other side, you always say, I knew it was going to be okay anyway. See? And the more you get on the other side, the more it builds stronger faith. So as we go through and we get this faith, it builds and builds. And then we pass it on to other people. Now, it was shared here that and I work with newcomers. I love working with newcomers because the big thing is just like speaking. I'm not a speaker, I'm a sharer. I share my experience, I'm not a speaker. But when I share, it takes me back at how fortunate I've been. When I'm talking to newcomers, things come out of me to tell them how great of a program we got, until all at once we get a rush of gratitude. I can sit at home and count blessings and feel grateful. But if I'm working with a newcomer and sharing with you, I get a rush of gratitude. And us alcoholics likes rushes. How am I doing, James? Been an hour already? Great. That means I could be done. Anyway, so I'm glad that you guys asked me down here to share some of this stuff with you. And you know, I probably got a little carried away in the long, what it used to be like, but the big thing is James asked me to tell a little bit about myself, and I just touched the top of the iceberg. I mean, so you know, there's a lot more, but the big thing, the heaviest thing that I want most of you already know, but I want that newcomer to know, is there's something really big here. And I'm telling you, just stick around and let it hook up. Now, my belief in God completely changed from what I believed when I turned it over, because I didn't really believe. But when I turned it over and I started to practice in this program, I found out that this God always loved me. He never condemned me. He let me condemn myself until I got tired of it. And when I got tired of condemning me, he said, okay, Jewel, I'm going to teach you how to forgive yourself. And that's what he's done. He's taught me how to forgive myself. And I tell people, I don't know how many of you knew Benny Hill on TV. Anybody remember Benny Hill? Yeah. Remember that little old man? And you just slap him around? That's kind of the way God's drive has taken me through this program. Just kind of, get back over here, Joel. Come on, back over here. But what I'm going to share with you, and then I'm going to sit down, is back in 1962, after that chicken I cooked. By the way, when I got back over there, her and her son had eaten my damn chicken. But back there in 62, like I said, I got down beside that bunk and I turned my life over to care of God. And I know that that was the day I worked that third step. To this day, I have never changed my mind on that decision. I've gotten away a few times, and I'll always stop and think, do I want to take back charge, or do I want to stick to that decision I made in 1962? And the answer so far has always been the same. I think I'll stick to that decision. Thank you.
I think we got a great talk going on here. Thanks for watching the channel. Taper Dave here. Just curious, do you think this is better than Zoom? Okay, this is how I prepare my drone for launching. I like to do it inside the cab of my truck so I'm not standing outside in the weather. To install the joysticks for control, up and down, right and left, powered on. I have an Android phone that I use to connect it to the drone with. And it's actually controlled through the iPhone, through an app. Oops, wrong way. It's actually controlled through the iPhone, or through this Android phone, through the app. It's actually controlled through the Android phone, through an app, and you connect it through this short connection right here.
Remote control connected.
Remote control's connected. So I pull out the drone. I have to extend the legs. Long legs extended first, then the short legs. Remove the gimbal protector. Set that aside, then power it on one short burst, then one long burst. I lay it down. So I have to go to calibrate. So the drone's not connected yet. It shows you here as this drone gets disconnected, even though the remote's powered on. So the drone has to establish it's connected. So I go into the app to calibration mode. First I'll calibrate the remote controller. Start calibration. Out, in, oop, out, in, up, down, and then this little wheel is to control the gimbal. So it's calibrated. Go to gimbal calibration, start calibration, and then it calibrates the gimbal. I don't know if that shows up. The gimbal's moving all over the place. Changes, you can see it on the video. And I'm calibrated to take off. It's acquired 7 satellites at the moment. There are 26 satellites up in the sky, which it has to acquire before you can take off. So it's connected. It's got enough satellites. This is white. I can go to press this little arrow button, swipe right to take off, and it would start the motors if I slid this to the right. But I'll wait till I get outside. Don't want to do it inside.